Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the OPA Insurance webinar, Professional Liability for Pharmacy Students, where we will examine the recent OCP changes and its implications for pharmacy students. My name is Christopher Williams, and I'm Insurance Manager at OPA, and we're pleased to bring this evening's webinar to you just to provide some more information on the recent OCP changes. This evening's session is sponsored by Hub Ontario, broker for OPA's PLI and store insurance programs. The session will run for approximately 1 hour, where we will have 45 minutes presentation and 15 minutes for Q&A. Just as a reminder, we will have a draw for the attendance prize of one of two $50 Visa gift cards. And this will be done just before the Q&A, and the winner will be announced before this webinar ends. In terms of housekeeping, just want to make you be aware that questions can be entered in the Q&A box, and responses will be provided during the Q&A section. So this evening's presenter is Kim Stewart. Kim Stewart brings her 20+ years of insurance industry experience alongside a passion for demystifying insurance in her leadership of Hub's programs teams. Kim leads a team of 25 people, providing commercial risk management services to numerous provincial and national associations, along with other affinity and non-for-profit groups. Kim has developed and presented numerous webinars for provincial and national associations, including the OPA, on topics such as professional liability, water damage mitigation, cyber risk in healthcare, and digital risk exposures. As an associate professor at Humber College Insurance Management Program, Kim's enthusiasm extends to her sharing knowledge with students looking to enter the insurance industry. She's also the proud contributor to the Women's Insurance Crusade Against Cancer, WICC, and the Holland Bloorview Capes for Kids. Without further ado, I will pass it over to Kim for this evening's presentation.
Thank you so much, Chris. After listening to that, I think I need to pare that down a bit. That was a long introduction talking about me. And I am so pleased to have an opportunity to speak to OPA members this evening. More importantly, I love that tonight's conversation is focused with students. I really do value the opportunity to speak to students to help them get a better understanding of what professional liability insurance is, and how it can help protect you, how it can start you off on the right path of setting up an insurance history, and most importantly, getting a better idea of what risks are out there for students and how the OPA's program is really set up to protect you. Chris, I want to make sure I'm being cognizant of my time, but I do know that we've got about an hour here. And I know that we want to make sure we're leaving time for questions at the end. So I encourage you to nudge me along if you find I go off track in any way.
Will do.
So, tonight's conversation is professional liability for pharmacy students. I have had the opportunity to work with the OPA since 2018 on their pharmacy liability program, as well as a program for pharmacy operations. And we also do cyber insurance for pharmacists. What that means is I've had an opportunity to really get to know the different exposures that are out there that pharmacists, pharmacy owners, pharmacy techs, and students face. So today, the whole intent of today's conversation is regarding what's happening with pharmacy students and recent changes we're seeing in the Ontario College of Pharmacists. So the majority of you are aware of the fact that there have been recent regulatory changes at the OCP. What that means is, as a result of the fact that students are no longer required to register or to be regulated and to sign up with the Ontario College of Pharmacists, what that means is that they are no longer mandated to carry professional liability insurance. Historically, when pharmacy students were registering with the Ontario College of Pharmacists, one of the mandates of that was that everybody who is registered with the college must have professional liability insurance. And the Ontario Pharmacists Association recognized this need right away and historically has provided extremely competitive pricing on professional liability insurance as part of the engagement through the OPA. While we know that it is no longer mandatory to register with the college, keeping a pharmacy insurance as a student, keeping that professional liability as a student does create an insurance history, but it also, more importantly, helps safeguard students. And I remember being a university student. I mean, it was a very, very long time ago, but I do remember being a university student. And on that professional side, you have a lot of things weighing on you. The last thing that a student needs is any type of situation holding over their heads as they are working in a professional environment and being concerned about potentially having to respond to a claim that they have been named in. We're going to spend the rest of today talking about what that type of situation could look like, what the opportunities are for students to have a better understanding of what professional liability insurance means and how it helps protect you, both from a claim from a regulator as well as a medical malpractice claim, and then what options you're going to have in front of you. So, as a healthcare professional, which pharmacy students are right from the very beginning, they are vulnerable to lawsuits. And these are often lawsuits coming from medication errors and miscommunication or patient dissatisfaction. We also know that pharmacy students are working in a pharmacy that is seeing significant changes in regulations in recent days. Pharmacies are not just a place where people are getting their drugs filled. They're going in for people are going into a pharmacy for consultations. They're going in for vaccines and flu shots. They're going in to discuss minor ailment issues. And they are counting on a pharmacy, often in a smaller regional setting, to be a healthcare hub for them. Pharmacy students that are engaging in working in a pharmacy at those points are given great opportunities to learn about all of these different areas. However, in light of those different areas that a pharmacy is supporting in the community, there are akin to some risks that could be coming up. And we do know that there is a potential for legal expenses and damages that could be substantial if a pharmacy student was named in a risk. We do know that when pharmacy students are working in their community pharmacies, that there may be coverage extended from health educational institutions, and there may be coverage extended from a healthcare setting. However, we do strongly encourage pharmacy students to get additional information wherever possible it is from those institutions and settings to have a good understanding about how a student would be covered in the event that a claim was brought in that specifically named the student. If there was a claim that named a student and there was no clear coverage for that student, whether it's on their own insurance or whether it is under the insurance for an educational setting, that students could face financial exposure. And because students are already facing significant increase in inflationary pressures as they go through, the last thing a student needs is having an additional need to potentially just provide a minor defense so that the student's name can be removed from a claim. I'm going to be providing a claims example later on in this conversation. And when I do, I'll also discuss how it would work from a defense perspective and potential costs that could be incurred in order to be able to address what that situation would look like. So we know that students, when they are operating in the community pharmacies, that they are being supervised. You're being supervised by various different groups. You're either being supervised quite often by a supervising individual pharmacist, but you are also often being hired by either an entity from a healthcare setting or being hired by an individual community pharmacy owner that has you participating so that you can get your experience, but that you can also be a part of that pharmacy community. When an individual pharmacist is acting as a supervisor, they are extending themselves when it comes to part of looking after and overseeing a student work. What we want to ensure is that when a supervising pharmacist, pharmacy tech, is working with a pharmacy student, we know that supervising pharmacists will feel more comfortable knowing that there is a clear line of coverage and defense for a pharmacy student, so that when an individual pharmacist is supporting them, they know that there's an extra line of defense available for them. We also know that when a student has coverage, that an individual supervising pharmacist won't be as concerned for their liability in the event that they're named. Often they are named because the student may or may not have insurance. And when we talk about our claims example coming up, I'm also going to be talking about the rise of litigious actions in Canada, especially in healthcare. When an individual supervising pharmacist feels more confident and secure in supervising a pharmacy student because they know that that pharmacy student has liability protection, this will encourage more pharmacists to take on student training roles. And we know how important this training and engagement in a community pharmacy is to the development of pharmacists through their education process. Going beyond the supervising pharmacist, we also know that there are pharmacies quite often that are employing these pharmacy students. And when an employer takes on a pharmacy student, they also then take on that entity of the pharmacy also takes on a risk, because potentially there might be an error that a student could maybe just be named in that could result in the pharmacy entity being named in a claim. So pharmacy entities do benefit by reducing their exposure to liability. And it also shows that the pharmacy entity is showing responsible practice and strong risk management. In the event of a loss, there's also a potential issue that could arise if an entity was named in a claim, and that pharmacy entity does not have professional liability insurance to cover that entity. We do know that the Ontario Pharmacists Program for pharmacies specifically includes coverage for a pharmacy entity. But we do know that it is a bit of a misconception in the Ontario pharmacy community that the individual professional liability will extend to the entity. In other words, if a pharmacy owner has their own professional liability, more often than not through the Ontario Pharmacists Association's individual PLI program, there is at times an assumption that that policy will extend to cover their pharmacy entity. And that is not the case. It is explicitly clear that an individual professional liability policy, which is rated extremely competitively, is set up to only name an individual pharmacist, in the same way that the pharmacy student professional liability is set up so that it is specifically intended to cover only the pharmacy student. So as I said, we can put forward a claims example that will allow us to walk through a potential situation that a pharmacy student could face as they are working in a community pharmacy. And then we'll talk a little bit more about what the results could be. So in this case, a student from Ontario University has been hired by ABC Pharmacy during their schooling and training. This student was hired by the owner of that pharmacy, Miss ABC, and are being supervised by Mr. XYZ, who is a pharmacist for over 20 years. I'm going to tell you guys, I wrote this example and I really should have used better names. The claim would come up where a claim letter is received by ABC Pharmacy from a patient who had their prescription filled on a busy Friday at the pharmacy. During that day, pharmacists were dispensing drugs, they were helping customers, they were administering flu and COVID-19 vaccines. The claim states that there was a dispensing error that caused bodily injury to the patient. Because we are seeing a significant increase in plaintiff lawyers in the healthcare industry, sadly, this claim names all parties that were working behind the counter at the pharmacy that day. It names Miss ABC, Mr. XYZ. It names another pharmacy technician. It names the ABC pharmacy entity themselves, and it names the student from Ontario University. All of those parties that were named in a suit must provide a defense and respond to the claim in a timely manner. So when those people who are named in the suit have professional liability, they're going to provide this letter to their broker, to their insurer, and those will respond on their behalf, meeting their requirements. Their broker and insurer will advocate on behalf of their insured, and in certain cases, state that there really isn't a need for their insured names to continue on that suit because they were not engaged in the specific incident. More likely than not, a student was not at fault in this claim scenario. However, they still need to provide a defense and respond if they are named in a claim. So in the event any party named in a claim does not have liability insurance, there is a strong possibility that they will have to pay out of pocket in order to defend the claim, even if the defense of that claim is just to have their name removed from the suit. I mentioned at the beginning of this claims example that we are seeing a significant increase in litigiousness as it comes to claims. And as a result, we are seeing that it's the rise of a term that we call the nuclear verdict, which means legal plaintiff lawyers are looking to name as many people as possible with the goal of finding, the ability to gain as much money as possible for their patients. Now, I am not a lawyer. I know some good lawyers. I'm related to a couple of lawyers. And I do understand that the legal system plays an extremely important part in our day-to-day lives. However, it is very clear as what we are seeing in the healthcare industry that this rise in healthcare law in healthcare claims is leading to wanting to make sure that anybody who could be facing a naming in the lawsuit understands what their exposures are and takes advantage of the opportunities and support that they can be provided, whether it is through their association, whether it's through their educational institutions or other healthcare settings. to make sure that they're properly protected. When it comes to out-of-pocket costs, I can advise that more often than not, we see standard lawyer fees being approximately, on average, at least $500 an hour, and it would likely have at least a few hours engaged with a defense lawyer in order to be able to get this through. Now, when you participate in a professional liability program and you have professional liability insurance, those costs are covered from $1. And if there is a deductible on your policy, it is made very clear when that deductible comes into play. I am pleased to advise that on the Ontario Pharmacists Association's PLI program, that claims brought forward for bodily injury, these types of medical malpractice claims, do not have a deductible. We can advise that there are deductibles when you are responding to an Ontario College of Pharmacists tribunal claim, which happens after pharmacy students have graduated. And those types of exposures do carry a deductible, but it would not apply to students in that setting. So as we've discussed what the exposure is, now we want to talk about the right type of coverage for pharmacy students. There are a number of programs and opportunities for healthcare professionals to secure professional liability or medical malpractice or errors and omissions insurance. All of those misnomers or all of those names are all under the same thing. It is intended to provide professional liability for students. The reason that a standalone professional liability insurance is required is that most general liability policies specifically exclude professional liability. And as such, it is very important that a dedicated professional liability product is purchased. So when students or healthcare professionals are doing their research, we strongly encourage them to make sure that they're looking at policies that specifically cover healthcare and healthcare-related legal issues. That could also include tribunal and regulatory legal defense, settlements, and damages. You also want to make sure that you have a professional liability policy that has been specifically underwritten, that the wording has been fine-tuned and tailored for your profession. HUB and the Ontario Pharmacists Association have spent years fine-tuning the professional liability option for pharmacists, as well as the entity professional liability option for pharmacy owners, making sure that that cornerstone of their coverage is best in class. When you are reviewing your policy details, whether that's with your broker or with your association, you should ensure that the coverage aligns with the potential exposures during training and your future practice. You also want to make sure that as the scope of practice can often change, and we've seen multiple changes in scope and practice for pharmacy professionals over the last few years, you want to make sure your policy automatically covers it. We're pleased to say that baked into the professional liability program for the Ontario Pharmacists Association, then any change in scope of practice is automatically covered. We do know that this was very, very key as we saw the pharmacy profession in Ontario and internationally having to pivot when it came to the global COVID-19 pandemic. The scope of practice was automatically changed by the Ontario College, and Ontario pharmacists that were part of the OPA program understood immediately after we issued a bulletin to them that they have coverage, that they can do testing, that they can provide these vaccines. And it was excellent peace of mind for those pharmacists that were dealing with rapidly changing regulations, rapidly changing needs in their communities. And pharmacists felt more secure knowing that they could help people in need in their community while also maintaining their strong best-in-class protection through their professional liability program sponsored by the OPA. Out of all of those things, this last point here really is important. Comprehensive policies will provide peace of mind, and it'll also provide financial protection. And knowing that students who are putting in so much time and effort that want to be engaged in the pharmacy industry, they really want to make sure that they have peace of mind and financial protection so that they can continue putting themselves forward, putting in the hard work and the long hours in order to be able to attain their education goal. So as we look to, open this up into our next step, which is really, I want to open this up for some questions and take some time and go back and forth on this, is that we want to ensure that pharmacy students, first of all, understand what professional liability insurance is, understand what their risks are, and then make sure that they understand what options are available to them. As we have reviewed this, Hub and the Ontario Pharmacists Association do strongly believe that pharmacy students should prioritize individual professional liability insurance to keep yourselves protected. Not only are you protecting the individual student, but knowing that individual pharmacy students that are operating in community pharmacies supports supervising pharmacists and pharmacy entities. We know that pharmacy students, when they're coming out and they're doing this training, that sometimes it's easy to find a position, and to be honest with you, sometimes it's not. Pharmacy students that carry professional liability just takes that little bit of an extra step to show that they're providing, and they're protecting themselves, which also allows those supervising pharmacies and their pharmacy entities that they know that they are going to be protected, and in the event of a claim, that they have that coverage and they'll be able to defend themselves. And we know how important this is in order to make sure that there's a responsible practice by pharmacy owners and supervising pharmacists. So Chris, I know that we are now at the point where we've kind of gone through the full topic and the details of our presentation. I know now we wanted to open it up to some questions, potentially some conversations on claims examples, or anything else that that this group would like to bring forward.
Just a reminder, you can go ahead and type your questions in the Q&A box. And we have one question currently, and it is, what trends in the healthcare industry might impact the landscape of professional liability insurance for pharmacists in the future?
So I think that is an excellent question. And one of the areas I would like to bring up, first of all, is minor ailment. Minor ailment diagnostics has just started in the industry. However, we also are starting to see that while we are not seeing a significant increase in claims, we totally understand that this is a brand new portion of the pharmacy scope of practice, apart from testing and vaccines. And so we anticipate potentially that broadening of practice can also potentially result in some changing in the landscape from a risk perspective and from an underwriting perspective. However, we are pleased to advise so far that we have not seen a significant increase in losses under the program that we've been engaged in as a result of minor ailment coverage. So we think it's really important that pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, and that students have a good understanding that they can feel confident that their coverage automatically protects them for those changes in scope, but that we're not seeing a significant increase in losses. And as a result, we have not seen a significant increase in premiums for professional liability. Although I also brought up that commentary regarding nuclear verdicts. I will say that in the healthcare industry, and this is not just specific to pharmacies, but in the entire industry, there is a significant increase in plaintiff lawyers that are looking to put together larger claims, and not necessarily class action losses, as you don't see as many of those in Canada, but there is a much higher potential for a larger verdict and or what I like to call the paint roller effect when it comes to looking for names in the event of naming somebody. Instead of just naming the pharmacy or a pharmacy entity, a plaintiff lawyer is going to quite often dive deep and go through and find anybody they could associated with that pharmacy and take a big old paint roller brush and name everybody that they possibly can in that loss, with the view that somebody out there might be the ones with the deepest pockets. And as such, there's an increased potential to have a claim and an award brought forward for them, and often a settlement as a result of insurers taking it forward. So we feel that those are two really strong trends: the broadening of scope of practice and the increase of nuclear verdicts that we are seeing right now in the industry.
Okay. And there are a few questions coming in. This question: when can we sign up for insurance? So insurance will be available for 2025 with the next membership campaign. And I think that should launch by the third week in November. So around November 22nd, thereabout, we should be open for membership and PLI. So stay tuned for that email from OPA. You will be alerted that membership campaign is now open, and you can feel free to go to the website and purchase your membership as well as insurance. One more question. We have a few questions here, Kim. So when selecting an insurance plan, should we speak with a lawyer prior to making a choice, or would we only need to find a lawyer when involved in a case?
In my lens that I've seen, you really only need to engage with legal counsel if you have been named in a suit. As I've said before, and there's been a lot of work that's been done with the Ontario Pharmacists Association in developing this program, and we've historically had legal advice, risk control, risk management advice when it comes to developing of this product. So there is no need for or mandate or requirement for an individual student to get legal advice prior to purchasing liability insurance and membership through the Ontario Pharmacists Association. And we always encourage pharmacy students, if they come up against something that somebody says they're going to make a claim or they've received anything, go to your Ontario Pharmacists Association first, and then they will lean in with Hub and they will engage with us. We think that's the right way for students to come through, because sometimes it's something that the Ontario Pharmacists Association has seen time and time again and can provide some immediate guidance. In the event that a pharmacy student is named, excuse me, Hub's advocacy team is here for students when they're part of the OPA PLI program to help them out from minute one. We put you at ease. You're going to talk to people who really understand your program, and then we'll get the ball rolling as we need to with your insurer. And then you can pass that on to your insurer and let them do all of that work so that students can get back to doing the work that they are doing in their community pharmacies.
Okay, thanks, Kim. And there is one question from a pharmacy technician student. As students trained to be a pharmacy technician can engage in the scope under supervision, similar to students. Do you have any information about this? Is it recommended for those students who hold PLI or not really recommended, as a pharmacist or supervising professional would take the responsibility? I think you alluded to that in the presentation as well, but if you want to highlight that a bit more.
I did, and our lens on this is we strongly encourage all students, whether you're on the pharmacy tech side or the individual pharmacist side, to purchase your professional liability insurance. As I just talked about with this paint roller brush effect, there is a growing rise in multiple names being made in a suit. And we feel, first of all, that it is important for pharmacy students. It's the most prudent risk management move for an individual student to have professional liability. But we also know that it results in a better feeling and a stronger feeling from from supervising pharmacy techs or pharmacists and pharmacy entities, that they know that their students are sitting there and they are protected. So in the event of a loss, nobody else's insurance is having to respond inadvertently for a student's engagement in the program.
Thank you. And I have another question from PharmD students at U of T. They're thinking of completing their educational rotations in Alberta. They have been informed that Alberta College of Pharmacists does not require provincial and student pharmacists to carry liability insurance, as the liability would fall on the preceptor supervising pharmacists. These pharmacists, you could not find them on the Alberta's College of Pharmacists website. So the question is, if they purchase PLI from Ontario or from OPA, would they be covered in another province?
So Chris, we do know that our program is dedicated to Ontario pharmacists. With that being said, there is an ability to purchase professional liability in Alberta for pharmacists. And I encourage you to reach out to that province's pharmacy association. And Chris, I'm sure that you guys have contacts there as you guys all work together. And they might even have a student program akin to what the Ontario Pharmacy Program has. Now, it is true that that risk can fall to the preceptor. It can fall to the supervising technician. It can fall to the entity. But we do know that those entities, those pharmacy techs, those supervising pharmacists are letting the OPA know that they feel more comfortable taking on somebody who has their own professional liability insurance as a student than those who do not.
Okay. Hope that answers that question for PharmD student. I am a first-year pharmacy student and therefore new to this topic. Is there a particular type of insurance from a specific association that you recommend most? What makes it stand out from the other insurances?
Well, I mean, Chris, you could handle this one, but I'm going to take it and I'm going to say that by far the broadest coverage available in Ontario for Ontario pharmacy students is that through the Ontario Pharmacists Association. And I say that because for the most part, my friend Chris and I here have actually been the ones helping to develop it over the last 6 years. We've ensured that that program meets any automatic changes in scope and coverage, that it's been underwritten and reviewed to ensure that the coverage is as broad as you can get in the industry. And from a student cost perspective, that it is extremely competitive. Now, Chris, I'll lean into you to talk about how they access professional liability as part of their membership through the OPA.
Yeah, so each membership opens towards the end of the calendar year. So the professional liability runs for the calendar year. That's January 1 to December 31st. OPA is a membership organization. We do offer membership to students as well. And as I mentioned earlier, the next membership campaign starts around November 22nd. At that time, you will be able to buy the membership and insurance for the year 2025. So as soon as that is open and it's ready for members to access, then you will be getting an email from OPA just advising that the website is now open and you will be able to access. But again, as Kim said, we do offer one of the strongest programs in the province, and we'll always, ensure that it stays up to scope to make sure that as soon as your scope is changed, it automatically provides you that level of protection as well. And I have another question. In regards to the common risk and claims, what are the most common risks or claims that pharmacy professionals face that could necessitate this type of insurance?
Sure.
Most common risks.
Professional liability, where we see often risk is we see incorrect dosage. We see incorrect medication being done. We occasionally see an issue with incorrect advice being provided. We could also now see that as a result of that minor ailment diagnostic being a part of things as well. So those are some of the broadest areas that we see as claims under the professional liability. All of the things that I just mentioned here would be covered under a professional liability policy, and it would come to protect and it would automatically defend. A professional liability policy often also defends if an individual professional is named in a college complaint. This is often also called a regulatory complaint, or it could be viewed as a tribunal legal complaint. In that case, some of these things are not necessarily associated with a dosage item. Some of these things can be associated with the operating of a pharmacy, billing to insurance, maybe refusing or providing a generic when they wanted a brand name and refusing to provide a brand name. All of those types of things that are a college complaint, a professional liability or a good professional liability program would also provide coverage for those types of legal defense costs. There isn't a third party as a patient making a claim against an individual pharmacist, pharmacy tech, or pharmacy student, but it is the office of, the Ontario College of Pharmacists creating an investigation after receiving a complaint. And more often than not, those complaints are coming from the general public. So the policy, a professional liability policy, should provide standard coverage for the professional risks that I noted, dosage, minor ailment diagnostics, et cetera, but also should provide a good tribunal legal defense. And the OPA PLI program does that.
Okay, and should pharmacy students maintain their professional liability insurance after entering the workforce, and if so, why?
Well, I would absolutely say, because as you enter the workforce, you are then increasing your exposure because you are then taking on the risk firsthand instead of operating under supervision like you are as a student. Also, once you no longer have student status, you are then mandated to be regulated by the Ontario College of Pharmacists. And when you are registered with the OCP, you must have professional liability. That is a regulatory mandate, and it outlines in their regulatory requirements the type of coverage you must have. Hub and the OPA have worked very closely to ensure that the coverage that's developed under the OPA's PLI program not only meets but exceeds the regulatory requirements that the OCP lines out for registered pharmacists and pharmacy techs.
And hopefully you can speak a little bit more on this topic as well, just to address this question in the same breath. Does having professional liability insurance affect job prospects or employer expectation of a pharmacy graduate? And I think you did mention, to some extent during the presentation, but if you could elaborate on that some more for us.
I have. And Chris, I might have you lean into it as well from your lens from pharmacists, and you guys have an opportunity to get to know them very well. But from our side, we know that when a pharmacy student has coverage, it means that the pharmacy tech, the supervising pharmacist, and or the pharmacy entity won't be, it is a less of a likelihood of them also being named, and the fact that there isn't coverage automatically naming the student. When a student has their own, they are playing a part in the risk management of this exposure. And we truly do feel that everybody should play their own part in engaging in risk management for the safety of their community.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
And as you mentioned, yes, we do see where pharmacy owners, they definitely want to make sure that they're covering, as we would say, all the bases, to ensure that everyone that's working within the store has some form of protection, whether it's from the individual standpoint or from the pharmacy perspective, which is the entity liability insurance, which we do offer on the store insurance as well. That's another topic, that's another discussion. But it's always important that every professional within that pharmacy is fully protected, fully covered, just to ensure that the public is also protected. We also have another question: which insurance providers are known to offer suitable professional liability insurance for pharmacy students, and what should students consider when choosing a provider?
Well, first of all, you want to make sure that you have a provider that understands what pharmacy students are doing, especially in your province, as we know that each province can be different. You want to make sure that you're purchasing coverage from somebody that is a known expert in healthcare professional liability, that has an understanding on how changes in scope of practice can occur, and that is really dedicated to supporting their insureds in the event of a loss. So I can advise, as I've said before, that what Hub and the OPA have been working together to provide is exactly that. We feel extremely confident in working with Northbridge, who is the insurer on the Ontario Pharmacists Program. It has been the insurer for more than 10 years. And this provider truly understands pharmacy insurance, what the risks and exposures are, and understands what is needed to be done in the event of a claim coming forward. Chris, I actually really struggle to think of any real complaints we have ever received, or maybe even you guys have ever received, when dealing with this type of loss. It's so important to have somebody that knows your and understands your profession.
Yeah, I've seen persons who are practicing for 10, 15 years, and they do have their first claim, their first letter from OCP, and it's actually a very scary, frightening experience. So at that point, you definitely need someone who understands what happens when you have a notice from OCP or you're served with a claim, and how to help you to manage and navigate the process, just to make sure, just to alleviate some of that stress, as we call it. But it can be a really intimidating experience. So you definitely need to have that partner with you to sort of walk you through that process. Another question for you. What is the recommended amount of coverage for pharmacy students, and how does it differ from practicing pharmacists?
Well, I do know that, Chris, when we come to the options and we think about what's been put out there, is we often strongly recommend to start out with a limit of $2 million. And the rationale behind that is that as we see these increase in nuclear verdicts, that $1 million in coverage is truly not what it used to be. I'm fully aware that I'm speaking to students right now, and those students are thinking, do you know what we could do with $1 million right now? So I can of course understand that, and I feel the same way. But we do know that as we have developed a program that through the OPA, the starting limit for students is $2 million, and that's the student offering. Chris, I also know you have very competitive pricing tied into both membership and student professional liability for those. And then it goes up from that 2 million, because 2 million is the minimum that the Ontario College of Pharmacists will allow licensed pharmacists and pharmacy techs to have. So we, the OPA through Hub offers increased limits, 2 million, 3 million, $5 million options. And I'll tell you that as you increase those limits, that actually becomes a personal preference. We often know that pharmacists working in different settings elect to take over different options. Somebody who is in maybe more of a hospital setting is more comfortable with the 2 million. Often we find that community pharmacists that are offering this wide range, which also increases your exposure, can at times lean in towards a $5 million option.
Thank you. Just trying to go through a bunch of questions. The questions are coming in. What are the common scenarios or claims that a pharmacy professional might face that would be covered by this insurance? I'm sure there are many, but if you could just
We've talked a
identify
little bit on it,
one.
is that if professional liability, we sometimes have had claims where somebody was given the wrong medication. Now, as a result, and it caused some significant bodily injury as a result. So that claim came in, and sometimes it is, and the claim is being reviewed, it's not only the pharmacist that was at fault. At times it could also be the doctor that was at fault. Maybe their prescription was not clear. Maybe the pharmacist did not call to get confirmation. Maybe the receptionist at the doctor's office gave the wrong information. All of those things will come into play when it comes down to the incorrect medication or the incorrect dosage that is being provided. And we do see that as the largest exposure. We also see bodily injury claims coming in as a result of vaccines. Now, sometimes it's that they are given in the wrong location. At times, people could be given the wrong vaccine. All of that type of exposure and incidents would be addressed under the professional liability program. I know also, Chris, as I was looking through, people would say, well, what's not covered? What's not covered by this? A patient who is at your location and is walking up to the pharmacy and slips and falls before they come in and hand in their prescription. That is not covered under a professional liability policy. Your pharmacy operating insurance would have that type of premises liability, slips and falls, etc. And that is going to be a type of coverage that is going to not be covered underneath there. Criminal acts. Pharmacies deal in narcotics. If you are charged with a criminal act associated with narcotics, your policy is not going to respond if you are found guilty of a criminal act. So I'm going to take a point, Chris. I have never seen so much engagement in webinar questions in our entire time of working together. And I just want to say to these students, it is so great when you give a webinar, you get an opportunity to engage in this. And since Chris knows I am a university professor over at Humber, this is so much fun to be able to engage, which I just want to say thank you to these students for being so engaged in this process.
Okay. I'm just responding to some as you speak as well. Okay, so there's another one that asks, as the field of pharmacy evolves, how might changes in practice standards or regulation affect the need for professional liability insurance?
Well, we've leaned into scope of practice a few times, and we know as scope of practice changes, insurance needs absolutely can change. When an insurance program is developed, it is so key that the scope of practice is just followed and built into your policy program. So when you see changes, you're able to react immediately. I alluded to a little bit when it came to COVID testing. Testing for any type of illness was not part of the standard Ontario pharmacy operations prior to COVID. After that, when it was immediately changed and the scope of practice had to respond very quickly to the change from the Ontario College of Pharmacists, the Ontario Pharmacists Association was able to advise their members almost immediately that your professional liability extends and covers you. And so we know that put OPA members at ease, knowing that they were automatically covered and they didn't have to be concerned about it. There was no additional charge for that. There was no need to register for anything like that. And we also managed to come in where we had emergency pharmacists who were coming back in to the industry after not working for a while, and they automatically were able to purchase coverage and to be able to come in and help on that relief aspect. And it was so important to know that they had coverage that they knew that was familiar to them. They could purchase it, they could go, and they could be able to help out in their community right away.
Thank you. In regards to the claims process, what steps should a pharmacy student take if they're involved in a situation that may lead to a liability claim?
So first of all, we always encourage you to, as a student, We encourage you to talk to your education provider first and your employer who you're working with first. I think that should be your first course of conduct. Then we encourage you to reach out to the Ontario Pharmacists Association. They're going to be able to talk to you, likely have had students that might have had similar situations. If you are insured through the OPA's PLI program, we also encourage you to reach out to Hub. We've got, when you get your insurance certificate, you're going to be able to get some contact information right there to reach out. And our claims advocates really understand your operations. We understand how the Ontario College of Pharmacists work. We understand how these professional liability claims work. And we're going to guide you through the process so that you can then pass on this exposure to your insurer and have them handle it. So you can get back to doing the good work that you're doing.
And there's another question. How frequently should pharmacy students reassess their professional liability insurance coverage as they progress through their education and into their careers?
Questions. Chris, I would say that as a pharmacy student, we strongly encourage them to take professional liability. We recommend a $2 million limit as that's starting out in that professional coverage. However, as you move on into your career, the increase in limits beyond the mandated $2 million coverage that's regulated by the Ontario College of Pharmacists can be at a personal discretion. At times, it could be a employer discretion. Now, Chris, I'm not familiar if any of the larger pharmacy operations at times requires pharmacists to have a larger amount or not. We know how important it is to offer choice to OPA members. So we've really worked at providing multiple options. And I can also say that they are extremely competitive when it comes down to purchasing $2 million in coverage, $3 million, $5 million in coverage. Are $400, $500, very, very inexpensive on an annual basis.
Okay, so we will have time for one more question, and then I will get the names of the two winners of the attendance prize.
Fantastic.
I wait on those for in the next minute or two, but we're going to take one more question. And what is a typical range of settlement or judgments in claims against pharmacy professionals? And just as a reminder, if you have not heard your questions answered and you want to reach out to any one of us, I did put Kim's and my email addresses in the chat. So feel free to send us an email, reach out to us if you have questions or have concerns that you want to be addressed.
Great, thank you. So on average, as we review our loss history, quite often these losses depend on the scope of loss. So you really can't say there is one type of loss because there are so many different types of losses that are seen under a program. However, we often see settlements starting at around $25,000 and then can go up into hundreds of thousands of dollars. Depending on the type of loss, there is a definite opportunity for it to breach those hundreds of thousands of dollars and to go into million, especially when it comes to children. Pharmacists are often providing for the care of children, and claims that engage minors quite often see a longer tail, and the settlements can go significantly higher. Tied into those settlements are defense costs. And as we know, everything is increasing with inflation, and so is legal costs. So at times you can see legal costs surmounting in addition to the settlement. And you want to make sure that you have insurance that will cover you for a settlement as well as the costs to defend.
Okay, so we're 2 minutes before closing, so I will announce the winners. And if you hear your name, please send me your email address. You can send it to me in the chat. So we have two winners. One is Fabian Dave, and the other one is Gideon Moore.
Congratulations, Fabian and Gideon. Hub is very pleased to advise that we will be sending you a $50 Amazon e-gift card.
So please send me your email addresses. You can send it in the chat, and we will we will get your gift card to you as soon as possible. And that's going to be that for today. We just want to say thank you all for attending this insurance webinar. We certainly hope you learned a lot more about OPA's PLI program and how this will help you to mitigate against the legal risks that you may face during your training and your future practice. And again, if there are any additional questions or if you require clarification on the topic discussed, please feel free to send myself or Kim an email. Email addresses are in the chat again. And again, we just want to say thanks to Kim for this evening's presentation and Hub for sponsoring this evening's event. And we all wish you a good evening and I hope you will join us some other time for another insurance webinar. And we will have many interesting topics for you, so we will send those out from time to time. Stay tuned, and again, be on the lookout for emails regarding opening of the OPA membership, and this will come in the next week or two. Again, thank you for attending and have a pleasant good night.
Thanks, Chris. Have a good one.
All right, thank you, Kim.
Bye, Chris.